If anyone knows of a family member, friend, anyone here on Hawaii Island who does not have a quality Bible, please go to the website. Please fill out the little form. We're giving away Reformation Study Bibles for anyone on the island, one per family. So hopefully we have enough funding long-term to do that. But at the moment, if people have needs, please let us know. We can get Bibles into people's hands at that point. We have a lot of different questions from a lot of different areas, but what I'd like to start with, Dr. Mounce, and thank you very much for this entire weekend. It's been wonderful. Can you start with just giving a little bit more of an overview of biblical training? And it's kind of a combo question of biblical training and then Greek for the rest of us. Can you go into a little bit how certain churches that maybe you've partnered with or you've worked with have used those resources in either a Sunday school setting or as a way to equip their people to grow in their faith using those two separate or together kind of sources?
Okay. Yeah, biblical training began as a desire to get world-class education back in the church where I think it belongs. I don't think people should have to go. The average seminary student graduates $60,000 in debt, and only 1 out of 10 make it 10 years in ministry. So the seminary system is broken. And also, there's not a lot of good teaching available in the church. And so we went out, and just because of how God has put me together and the relationship he's put me into, is that I know most of these guys. And so I go to them and say, hey, Doug Moo, can I record your class on Romans? You give it to me and I'll give it away for free. And Doug goes, sure, that's a great idea. So we have 2,300 hours of instruction, about 140 classes now at the 3 different levels of lay level, which is the foundations, college, which is the academy, and then seminary, which is the institute. The best way for biblical training to function is and I'll use this as an example, there's a church in Tennessee, 2,000 people, a really, really good preacher, really strongly biblical, but a half hour wasn't enough. And there were people that said, no, I want more, I want to learn more, I want to grow more. And so what they do is they just started working through from beginning to end on these different programs we have. And we have student guides, so it's a basic outline of a class, not for all the courses, but most of them. It's a basic outline with reflection questions. So the idea is you listen to it on your own, and then you get together once a week in a small group, and you talk about it. You're basically flipping the classroom. And, when you're together is not the time to listen to the lecture. When you get together is when okay, what do you think about that? How does this impact your life? Or do I believe something? Should I believe something differently? And in that church of 2,000, 200 people have gone through a 3-year program. And the pastor, actually, who just came on the board, says, this is fantastic because if I died tomorrow, I would not worry about my church because I've got 200 seminary-trained people who will keep it going the right direction. So that's the best way to use biblical training. You listen to the lectures when you commute, when you surf, or whatever. We have an app, and as long as you have a waterproof device, you can listen to the lectures when you surf, and then get together and talk about it. And what do you think of this? And so the student guides are meant to help to do that. On Greek for the rest of us, what happened is I wrote Basics of Biblical Greek, which is a standard way of learning Greek, and built all kinds of tools and lectures, whatnot around it. And I was listening to a Billy Graham talk once, and he said the one regret he had was that he never learned Greek. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So what can I do for Billy Graham? What can I do for the church, for those people that really want to get deeper in their Bible study but don't have time to learn traditional Greek? So Greek for the rest of us it teaches you enough Greek to understand your computer programs, to read better commentaries, to be able to do Greek word studies. That's chapter 10 out of 20-some. So it's pretty early. And it understand why translations are different and why they do what they do. And it really, really works, you all. And I hear about churches using the basics of biblical Greek, and I go, no, don't do that. They won't finish it. There's too much memory work. It's too hard. If your pastor doesn't remember his Greek, then chances are you won't have enough time to really learn it as well. And that's what Greek for the rest of us has done. Get accordance or logos. What is it saying? Why is it saying? And then how does it help me really understand the Bible better? I just finished the 3rd edition The workbook is due April 1st, and it'll be released next fall, and you want the third edition. So you want to wait for that. It's a whole lot better than the second edition. But that's what it's for. How do you learn Greek enough to go deep in your Bible study?
All right. If linguistics is not something you liked, how did you end up here?
God. I don't know another answer to it. Memorizing vocabulary is like next to impossible for me. So I write computer programs called flashworks to flash Greek at you and just say it over and over and over again. But what's important, I think, is that was all by God's design, because I wrote a totally different kind of Greek grammar. It's nothing like any of the others, and I think it's why it's done so well, just because most people are not natural linguists. And so if you read a book like Machen that I learned under, which is really good, but it assumes you know Latin, that just doesn't work anymore. And so I just think it was a challenge. I'm an organizer. I'm a simplifier. And I kept thinking there's got to be a simpler way of learning this language. And that's what pursued me. That's what I pursued.
Let's see. So other than the ESV and the NIV, you've mentioned several translations, but what would be the other ones you would recommend that people should use when using multiple translations that you mentioned earlier?
I love the CSB. I just think they've done a really, really good job. They use he, so it's going to become dated eventually. But right now, if you say the he is he, she, it's really, really a good translation done by very good people. I think it said Tom Schreiner was the chair of the New Testament revision. There were a couple of Old Testament guys that headed that up. The CSB is really, really good. The Net Bible is an interesting Bible. A guy named Joe wanted to give away a Bible on the web when there was no Bible, so he tried to get the NIV. They wouldn't let him do it. He said, well, that's stupid. I'll just buy the dumb thing. He's very wealthy. And they wouldn't sell it to him. He said, well, that's dumb. I'm just going to buy Zondervan. And so he made an offer for Zondervan, and Hupper didn't accept it. He goes, okay, this is getting out of hand. So we hired a bunch of people, and they produced the Net Bible. And the Net Bible is very good. And the thing that's unusual about it is there's 65,000 footnotes. So it's kind of a study Bible, but it really is, okay, what do these words mean? And the Net Bible, which is available for free, it's probably net.org or something. It wouldn't be that, but netbible.org. That's right. Bible.org is a guy named Hampton Keithley went to Joe and said, we need a site that people can come to study the Bible. And Joe said, okay, you build it, I'll fund it. And so it was all on Joe's service for his company originally. And then it just kept growing, and it's its own nonprofit right now. But they have the Net Bible, but the Net Bible is also on its own site. I just don't know. But Bible.org is a good site.
What does CSB stand for?
Christian Standard Bible. It started as the Holman Christian Standard Bible. They wanted to call it the Christian Standard Bible, but they couldn't get csb.org. Someone else owned it. Eventually, so they stuck the word Holman, which is some Southern Baptist guy's name on the beginning. And they finally got csb.org, and when they did the revision, they changed the name. And it's good not to have the person's name in the Bible. I think that's a good change.
We'll do all the translation questions here clustered. So is there any type of translation that the church is missing or that doesn't exist today?
No, people say, oh, there's so many Bibles, so many different translations, but whatever you want, you can get, and that's what's so nice. If you want a really word for word, you get the NASB. If you want something that a 6-year-old can understand, you get the NLT. If you want it, my dad helped do there's a version of the NIV called the NIRV, the New International Reader's Version. I haven't mentioned that, but my dad was one of the translators, and they reduced the NIV to a 3rd grade level. So he came to me one night and said, Bill, I need a 3rd grade word for fort. They're saying fort's 4th grade, and so we can't use fort. What do you call these things in the Old Testament? But that's actually a very good. The NIRV is designed for people who are reading English as a second language. So if you know someone in that position, like your friends that just came from Russia, the NIRV would be a very good translation. And then as their English gets better, it's a smooth transition to the NIV.
Are there any translations or versions that people should be careful or avoid?
Okay, the NLT is very good, but remember it's very, very, they've added stuff. So the ESV says that the sailors with Paul, they put out the sea anchors because they were afraid that they were going to run aground on the Syrtis, capital S. NIV says run aground on the shallows of the Syrtis. The NLT says run aground on the shallows of the Syrtis off the North African coast. Well, off the North African coast isn't in the Bible, but it's in the NLT. It'll help you understand it. Just be careful of that. Is the passion kind of sweeping through here as well, or is that more?
That's the next question.
Yeah. Andrew Sheed wrote a really good article on the passion, and it just debunks the book entirely. And I'm trying to think of, I've got it posted somewhere, but I don't know where it is. I should find it.
Can you put that on your blog for us?
Yeah, I can. Okay. I'll do it. The Passion's written by someone who thinks there should be more passion in the Bible. It's kind of like, I think it's quite a bit of passion, but it's a very charismatic person. But he is adding and adding and adding and adding and adding to the Bible. It's much longer than even the NLT is. And there are some places I've seen where he just simply says something that not only is not what the Greek says, it's simply not right. And it's just it's just sweeping through charismatic circles. I go to, as I said, a Foursquare church, even though I'm Reformed, and kind of Reformed. And it's just sweeping through that church. But you simply can't trust it at all. So stay away from that.
What about other translations done by certain individual groups, like, say, Jehovah's Witnesses and things of that nature?
Yeah, there is a Jehovah's Witness. I wouldn't touch it because they don't know Greek. And it's just, they just mistranslated John 1:1, 1:18. The key passages of Christ's divinity are just flat out mistranslated. So I wouldn't touch him. The thing you do with Jehovah's Witnesses, they'll say, well, the Greek says this. And so I say, well, let me go get my Greek Bible. You can show me. And they've been told to turn tail and run. So they don't know Greek, so you can't really get into a discussion with them. But the translation is not very good, but because it nullifies the divinity of Christ, you don't want to deal with it.
Someone from the audience came up and showed me a short writing from Desiring God on John Piper on the ESV, talking about how it was the perfect balance of, I don't remember if it's a balance between the formal and the original language and everything else. Have you read his comments?
Yeah. John's the main proponent. He's the main reason the ESV has a 12% market share. Because John pushed it so hard. Yeah. And John's a good friend of mine, so don't take this in a negative sense. But we translated a kind of a difficult genitive construction in 1 Timothy, the glorious gospel of Jesus Christ. And he saw it, and he writes, no, it's got to be the gospel of the glory of Jesus Christ. It's either an Hebraic genitive or it's not. And we changed it because we all love John, and it was an acceptable translation. So he was a little involved in that stuff, but he and Wayne Grudem are super good buddies, and through Gospel Coalition, John's been a huge proponent of the ESV. I was talking to someone, and they said, why did you settle on the level of English that you did? Well, one reason is we wanted people to be able to read it, and we worked really hard on this, actually, to be able to read it out loud and have people understand it. And this person said, well, you failed, because it's not understandable. Well, so John thinks it is a perfect blend. This person doesn't, and that's just why we have different styles. We use English differently. But John loves it and has pushed it aggressively.
Do copyrights sometimes force translation committees to use less than ideal interpretations or translations?
Yeah, copyright issues are difficult. I referred to the 2 Timothy 3:16, all scripture is God-breathed, which is an NIV-ism. And it's such a distinctive NIV-ism that in the ESV we could not use it. So I came up with God-breathed. And that's what's in, I think that's what's in the issue, whatever it was, God breathed. Because it's just in the translation of chesed. What did the NIV use? it's not mercy, it's covenantal mercies. It's the mercies God has towards his people, but not necessarily towards other people. And the NIV came up with its two-word phrase for that, and it's so distinctively NIV, you just can't copy it. So, I mean, you're always looking at the other translations, but lots of times you'll see one translation, like 5 words, is identical in about 6 translations, and we've all looked at all the other ones, and if that's what the Greek says, if that's what the Greek means, if that's the best way to say it, then we say it all the same way, and that's okay. But you can't use the distinctive translations.
This other question is almost the same regarding copyrights, but their follow-up, if translation committees are trying to provide the most accurate truth, then why even copyright? They are businesses and they have to turn a profit, right?
Yes, my lawyer friend. You understand, Bibles are phenomenally expensive. I mean, translators are now paid. The NRSV translators were never paid. And the original RSV translators were never paid. But the NIV translators, when they started back in the 70s, they would take these 12 guys and they would send them to Budapest. Or they would send them to some place that was really cheap, where they could work for 11 to 12 weeks at a time, which I can't imagine translating that long. And they couldn't go out and do other things. They wanted to isolate these guys so they wouldn't go off speaking or whatever. And the original NIV translators made a phenomenal commitment, and they weren't paid very much money. We're paid a little bit more. Actually, I don't even know what we're paid now, but we're paid something. But it's just really expensive to produce a translation. Millions and millions of dollars. And so, like when the 2011 came out, Zonovan had a pony up, I don't know the exact number, but it had to be tens of millions of dollars, because Zonovan controls the publication rights in the U.S. and a few other places. And you want to sit down and retypeset 20 different SKUs for a Bible? This is tens of millions of dollars. Workers worthy of his wages.
I missed this earlier. It's tied into the Greek for the rest of us. But this is in the homeschooling context. Yeah. How would you recommend teaching Greek to students through the homeschooling years?
I would use Greek for the rest of us, because there's a lot of English in it. And you'll find that once your kids have worked through the chapters, they're going to know their English grammar better than an English grammar is going to teach them, I think. But the way I say it in the preface is that when I was in high school, I learned Latin and I read Caesar's Gallic Wars. It was interesting. I learned Greek. I read the Bible. It changed my life. And so I just think the more you can get your kids into it. I've not been able to finish it, but I've been doing a website called kidsgreek.com. And there's about a year of homeschool curriculum on Greek there, because I wanted kids to start learning Greek so that as they learn it more, they could read better commentaries and this kind of stuff. But I've not been able to touch it in 4 to 5 years, so it's still pretty rudimentary.
You said we have 5,600 manuscripts of the Bible. How does that compare to other early documents? I'm assuming
there's no comparison. And a lot of these historical writings, we have 3 documents, we have 6 documents. I think there's 3 copies of Caesar's Gallic Wars. I'm not sure, but it's something like that. And these other documents were written usually hundreds of years after the event. So to have 5,600 Greek manuscripts, 10,000 Latin manuscripts, and I don't know how many Syriac and Armenian manuscripts we have, but it's thousands and thousands, all that were written starting in the 2nd century. There's just no comparison.
Can you talk about the Hebrew word yom and its semantic range? What is your opinion on the meaning / idea that Moses was communicating to his readers in the creation account in Genesis when using the word yom?
Yom means day. That's all I know about it. Yom means day, and that's all that I know about it. I mean, here's my position on the Genesis, and this is not a linguistic thing. It's just a theological thing. I just learned a long time ago to not tell God what He can and can't do. And if God wants to create in 6 literal yoms, then He's perfectly capable of doing that. I don't care. I have a little problem if He would build an apparent age into it, so to make it look like it's 10 million years old. But of course, the interpretation of the data is up for grabs. And I've got a friend, he just sent me his geography textbook he wrote, and he's a young earther, and he has all ways to explain what some people say it's, 1,000,000 years old. He says, no, when you put a flood on top of it, it's 1,000 years old kind of stuff. Right. And I don't know that stuff. I do think that, though, that the primary gist of Genesis 1 is theological. And all you have to do is look at the fact that there's light before there's sun. Sun's the fourth day, light's the first day. What's going on there? Well, the greatest god in the ancient world was the sun god, in all religions, basically. Ra in Egypt and whatnot. And I think part of what's going on is that, and usually in other creation narratives like the Gilgamesh epic, the creation is an afterthought. It's the result of God's fighting and things coming out of people's mouths, God's mouths, and stuff like that. I mean, it's chaos. And certainly the main point of Genesis 1 is that God created it. He created it orderly. He created it purposely. And he created it with human beings as the apex of creation. That's what the world needs to hear. That's what Genesis 1, I think, is primarily about. Now, if he did in 6 little days, fine. It's no skin off my back, or whatever the expression is. Right. Skin off what? My nose. Skin off my nose. Thank you. I did back. That didn't work. That didn't work. But yes, Yom has I do know it has a very wide range, and you can talk the day of and be encompassing very, very large periods of time.
In regards to the deconstruction of language in our society within oral tradition, how can we explain biblical language changes without making them sound like acceptance of the worldly view?
It's really hard. And this is the risk the NIV took. I remember talking to Doug Moo about this, and we went with they because we had the documentation, we could see where language is going. But if they gets too attached to multiple sexes or multiple genders, and the political ramifications of, tell me what your gender is, and what pronoun do you want to use, that becomes really difficult for a Christian, I think, because now it really does sound like we're catering to liberal feminism or something like that, which is we're not doing at all. But this is like 10 years after the fact, you go, language is changing, and this might compromise our message. The beauty of the NIV is that we keep it current. The committee meets for a week. This year, 2 weeks. It's really hard even to be translating 2 weeks. It's just too intense. But the NIV has committed from day one to stay up with the language. So, there may come a day in which we say we just can't say they anymore.
Right. So I guess my follow-up would be then, so has the committee ever spoken about or talked about something that could occur in the shift of language that would be a line in the sand, that if the language goes in this direction, that's just too far with regard to translation? Or is it always whatever the current language is going to be that you're going to try to work into that at that point?
This is a very interesting question. The NIV's commitment is to stay current with language. We don't want to sound archaic. The history behind the NIV is that Harold Long, anyway, some guy, Mr. Long, was a businessman in New York. He was sharing his faith with a non-Christian. He was reading from the King James, and the guy just started laughing at him. Said, do you really expect me to understand that? He went to the New York Bible Society, eventually to the International Bible Society, now called Biblica, in order to deal with that problem. And that's why it's in the NIV charter that we have to keep it up. For example, should we have contractions in the Bible? There are many times in which you speak that if you don't use a contraction, you sound like you're old and out of date. Some contractions are very natural, others aren't. Okay, here's a question. Does God speak in contractions? It's not good for this man to be alone, God says of Adam. Say, it is. Oh, that's kind of stuffy. So, the language is always changing. Unfortunately, the subjunctive is going out of use. We're all brokenhearted over that. Could and should. All these are things that are changing, and the NIV's committed to do it. Is there a line in the sand? I don't think we've ever talked about it. We really relied on the work of the Collins Dictionary people. I would certainly say that I would say a line in the sand is humankind. I can't say the word humankind and not be a feminist or a really liberal something or other. Not that all feminism's liberal, but I mean, humankind is just a manufactured word by feminism, right? And so if you start using that, you're so attaching yourself to that movement. So I will always argue against humankind. But who knows? In 20 years, that may be the word. Language changes.
See, that's the same question. What do you say to people who say that gender accurate is more marketing than translation?
They're wrong. I mean, it's just wrong. You don't know the 15. I would say to this, if someone was accusing us of this, say you don't know our heart. You don't know why we do. I still remember my favorite seminary professor saying, "You do not critique motives. You don't know what they are, and they don't matter. Oh, the only thing matters is what you say or what you write." Mm-hmm. So, I had some pretty strong feelings about Bud Ehrman's motives, and I've said some of that carefully because it's so well documented. But there is no one on the NIV committee. There's certainly no one on the ESV. I don't know the NLT folks as well, and nor the other ones, but the people I know on the CSB, none of them are going to choose language for political reasons. They're going to choose, how do I say this?
This just hit me. Do you all on the translation committees have to sign certain statements of faith in order to even be on the translation committee?
I never did. I don't think I did. Yeah. I mean, we know each other so well. We've read each other's books. We're friends. We've listened to each other's papers and professional meetings. So we know where everyone else is. I will tell you, though, you'll like this, that all 12 members of the ESV were, except for me, were fully reformed. And I was still trying to deal with limited atonement at the time. So I probably would have said I was a 5-point. Okay. All inerrantists. So I don't think that's ever published, right. But that's true of the ESV. It's not true of the other, I don't know about NASB, but it's not true about the other translations. Okay. Let's see. And all men, by the way, on the ESV. Okay.
In trying to share the truth and accuracy of the Bible with a Buddhist, what would you consider would be the main issues, questions, topics that might arise and that should be covered?
Buddhism is atheism. It was an attempt to reform the thousands of gods in Hinduism. And so Hindus just made Buddha a god. It's how they took care of that. But, I mean, Buddhism is so fundamentally different. Ed and I were talking about this. Buddhism, Buddha said that if you find a Buddha on the side of the road, kill him because he's not Buddha. It's a liar. Because there is no such thing as God. And the ultimate goal in Buddhism is, what was his word? Nothingness. There's nothing. Nirvana is nothingness. And the way you get to nothingness is through a series of thousands of reincarnation, where in each reincarnation, hopefully, you get your emotions under control. Emotion's not the right word, but it's just something like that. And so the Bible would not be the place to start. Maybe the claims of Christ, maybe, the ultimate goal, that what are you looking for in your life, what's satisfying. I mean, to be much more evangelistic, I would think that the Bible would be way down, just because it's so fundamentally different.
Probably some other apologetics approaches to showing the deficiencies of that before talking about the rest.
Do you remember there was an old, who was it? It was an old movie where a guy was a professional quarterback, and I'm not going to. Anyway, at the end of the movie, the quarterback that he always wanted to be got hurt and died, and he moved into the other quarterback's body and became that quarterback and won the football game. And there was just something that was so fundamentally unfulfilling in the movie, because he wasn't the same person. He became the other person. And that's the nothingness. That's the loss of individual identity. And that's just fundamentally different from Christianity.
I think this is the last one for today. So are there any introductory resources on textual criticism that you would recommend? Because, again, most of them are very technical.
Yeah, biblical training. I mean, that's where they are. I would go to I think we put it in the Institute, the plural, Why We Trust Our Bible. And in there's a 3-hour lecture by Dan Wallace. That's going to be the most basic, fundamental introduction to the whole issue of text criticism. If you do that, you're going to wonder where you are, and you're in Dan's office. Dan has a round office that was built for 8,000 volumes, and he has 11. And it's 2 stories, and it's just this incredible office. But he's got this massive book on his desk and a skull. And we get asked all the times, what's the skull, what's the book? The skull is, do you know why Dan would have a skull on his desk? Who always had his skull in every statue or picture of him? Jerome, to remind him that he was mortal. The book is one of the most important Greek manuscripts we have is Vaticanus, which is a 4th century manuscript that is owned by the Vatican, and the Vatican made 200 copies, exact copies. Wherever there was a hole in the original, they cut a hole in the copy. Signed by the Pope, and Dan got one of them. So that's the other book there. But if you want an introduction to text criticism, you could go to mine, which is like a 1-hour summary of Dan's lectures that's in the Foundations program. But Dan just did a really good job of explaining text criticism. And he's a lot better than I am at it.
Well, Dr. Mounce, thank you for spending the weekend with us. For anyone watching at home, everything is recorded on our YouTube channel, so Hawaii Island Reformation Fellowship. Please take a look at everything we have there. There will be new events coming up that we're working out right now, so keep an eye on the website, and we will let you know when those exist. But thank you for coming and spending time.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure.